A rural woman's small act of kindness transformed her life tremendously for the better after she casually saved a mobbed man with just a warm bowl of porridge soup, unaware of his hidden identity. But the pressures surrounding her small world almost made her lose her life and her only hope to a brighter life. Stay with us. It's going to be a long and hilarious binge watch, so be sure to get your popcorn and chips ready. Connect to your earphones and sit tight as we bring to you another amazing Blossom Heart love story written from the depth of our hearts to bless your soul immersely. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you would before the end of this story. And don't just enjoy the story. We urge you stay to the end because we poured in our best for you in creating this heart-warming story. We'd also like to hear from you in the comments section what you expected and how much you loved the story. Now let's begin. The rain that had started as a drizzle in the afternoon had grown heavier by nightfall. The narrow cobblestone streets of the small rural town glistened under the dim orange glow of street lamps. Shops were already shutting down one after another, leaving only the smell of fried dough, roasted chestnuts, and hot soy milk lingering faintly in the damp air. At the end of the street, a young woman bent over her food stall, carefully wiping down the tables and stacking the bowls. Shushan was her name. 26 years old, strikingly pretty in a way that was both gentle and unpretentious. She had grown up in this town, known to the neighbors for her kindness and for the warmth of the porridge she served every morning and evening. Tonight, though, her arms ached from the long day of serving workers, students, and travelers who passed by. She sighed, ready to pack up the last pot when she heard it. A low, strained voice. "Help me!" Startled, Shushan turned. A young man stumbled out from the rain, his shirt soaked through and his face half covered in blood and grime. His steps faltered until he collapsed right in front of her stall. "Oh my God! Young mister!" Shushan rushed to him, kneeling in the puddles without hesitation. His body was trembling violently, his breathing shallow. Whoever he was, he had clearly been beaten badly. "Please, help me," he whispered again before his eyes fluttered shut. Her heart pounded. In a small town like this, trouble rarely arrived at one's doorstep. But looking at his pale face, she couldn't abandon him. With all her strength, she dragged him inside her stall. The stove was still warm. Without a second thought, she reached for rice, ginger, and some shredded chicken, quickly putting together a steaming bowl of congee. The familiar aroma filled the cramped stall, comforting even to her. She sat by his side and gently fed him spoon by spoon. At first he could barely swallow, but as the warmth slid down his throat, color slowly returned to his face. His lips trembled. "Thank you," he murmured hoarsely. "You shouldn't talk. Just eat slowly," Shushan said softly, her brows knitted in worry. When at last the bowl was empty, he lay back, breathing steadier. The rain outside had softened, but it was already too late at night to send him away. She noticed he had no bag, no wallet, no phone, nothing. Whoever had attacked him had stripped him of everything. "You have nowhere to go tonight, do you?" Shushan asked gently. His tired eyes met hers. They were dark, sharp despite his weakness. Eyes of a man who seemed used to command, not to pleading. "No." Shushan hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "I have a small room upstairs. It's not much, but you can rest there until morning." She helped him up the narrow staircase to her modest apartment above the stall. The room was tiny. Just a single bed, a wooden desk, and shelves lined with recipe books and jars of spices. But it was warm. She handed him a towel and a dry shirt that had belonged to her late father. "Rest. Tomorrow we'll figure something out." The man nodded, lowering himself onto the bed. His voice was still weak, but steady enough to answer. "My name is Zhou Jieming." Shushan smiled faintly. "I'm Shushan. Sleep well, Zhou Jieming. You're safe here." For the first time that night, his tense expression softened, as if her words carried a weight no one had offered him in years. What Shushan did not know was that the man lying in her small, humble room was not just some unlucky traveler. He was the hidden heir and CEO of a powerful business empire, forced into the countryside after an untold secret he was fleeing from, and that saving him with a simple bowl of porridge would change her life forever. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the town wrapped in the clean scent of wet earth and fresh bamboo leaves. The street below Shushin's food stall was beginning to stir. Old men sweeping their storefronts, the bicycle shop owner yawning as he lifted his shutters, children tugging at their mother's hands as they hurried toward the little school at the corner. Upstairs, the soft clatter of pots and ladles woke Zhou Jiaming. He opened his eyes slowly. The bed beneath him was unfamiliar, the ceiling low, the faint smell of jasmine tea drifting through the small room. For a moment, disorientation hit him, then memory returned. The rain, the beating, the girl. He turned his head. The desk by the window was stacked with cookbooks and neatly folded paper napkins. On the wall hung a faded calendar with handwritten notes in the margins. A tiny, ordinary life, but it was the first place in a long time that felt unthreatening. Meanwhile, downstairs, Shushin moved quickly through her morning routine. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, apron tied firmly at the waist as she lit the stove, washed rice and chopped scallions. She worked with practiced ease, but her thoughts kept drifting upstairs. A stranger is sleeping in my room, a man I barely know. Am I foolish or just kind? She shook the thought away and stirred the pot. The congee simmered with a soft bubbling sound, filling the stall with warmth. The stairs creaked. She looked up to see him carefully making his way down. His face was still pale, but freshly washed, and he wore the oversized shirt she had lent him. Though simple, the way he carried himself, straight-backed, quiet, gave away a kind of presence that didn't belong to the countryside. "Morning," Shushin said, trying to sound casual. "Did you sleep well?" Zhou Jiaming inclined his head. "Better than I expected." His voice was calm now, though a trace of exhaustion lingered. "You should sit," she said, pointing to a stool. "Breakfast will be ready soon. Just plain porridge again. I hope you don't mind." "I don't." His eyes followed her as she ladled steaming congee into 2 bowls. She set one in front of him, adding a small plate of pickled radish. For a while they ate in silence. The early customers began trickling in, workers carrying toolboxes, an old woman with a cane, 2 children clutching coins in their fists. Shushin greeted each warmly, serving bowls with practiced cheer. To her surprise, Zhou Jiaming quietly rose from his seat and began helping. When a stool tipped, he steadied it. When a man dropped chopsticks, he handed him another pair. His movements were efficient, composed, yet he blended in as though he had done it all his life. "Thank you," Shushin whispered when the crowd thinned. He gave a faint shrug. "It's the least I can do." She studied him for a moment. He was clearly no ordinary traveler. His hands, though scratched, were those of someone who rarely did rough labor. His eyes carried a sharpness that seemed out of place in their quiet street. But he offered no explanations, and she didn't ask. By late morning, the rush was over. Shushin began washing bowls, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Zhou Jiaming stepped forward. "Let me." "You don't have to." "I know, but I will." And just like that, the stranger was at her side, rinsing bowls with steady hands while she wiped them dry. The sight was almost surreal. Yesterday he had collapsed in front of her stall, and today he was here, part of her ordinary morning. As sunlight slanted through the window, warming the steam-filled room, Shushin felt a strange awareness settle over her. Her life had always been predictable, each day a mirror of the last. Yet now, with a stranger under her roof and in her kitchen, something was shifting, quietly, but undeniably. She caught herself glancing at him more than once, and though he said little, she could feel it too. A change, as if the threads of 2 lives had just begun to weave together. The breakfast rush finally tapered off. The clinking of bowls, the chatter of customers, and the heavy footsteps of workers leaving for the day faded into the street beyond. For the first time that morning, the stall was quiet again. Shushin exhaled, wiping her damp hands on her apron. She carried 2 bowls of freshly ladled porridge to the counter and sat down, leaving a fair distance between herself and Zhou Jiaming. The space between them felt deliberate. Hers was caution. His was restraint. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Only the sound of porcelain spoons against bowls echoed softly. The faint breeze through the open window carried the smell of rain-soaked soil. At last, curiosity got the better of her. Shushin set her spoon down and glanced at him. "Do you remember what happened last night? How you ended up here?" Zhou Jiaming raised his eyes, calm but unreadable. He put his bowl down gently before answering. "I do. At least most of it." Shushin waited quietly. "I'm a traveler," he began, his voice low but steady. "I came to this region to survey the land. A company I work with has been considering investing here. Factories, workshops, something that could create jobs for young people in towns like this." But this was just a lie he had already prepared in case anyone asks why he was here. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. In their little town, such talk was rare. "But on the way," he continued, "the car I hired broke down. The driver warned me this town isn't the safest at night, but I thought." He gave a humorless chuckle. "I could manage." I walked further in, hoping to find an inn or a guest house. That's when a group of men surrounded me. They took my wallet, my phone, everything. "If not for you." He let the sentence trail off, the weight of unspoken gratitude lingering in the air. For a moment, Shushin softened. She imagined this stranger, polished, sharp-eyed, facing the roughness of town thugs alone in the rain. Something in his voice made it believable. "I see," she said after a pause. Then she rose, carrying her empty bowl to the sink. "That's unfortunate. But I suppose you'll be more careful next time." Her tone wasn't unkind, but it wasn't overly sympathetic either. Life had taught her not to be easily swayed by strangers' stories. She rinsed her bowl quickly and turned back to tidying the stall. Zhou Jiaming watched her for a long while, his spoon hovering in his hand. Her reaction, or lack of one, confused him. Most people, when they heard he was attacked, would have showered him with questions or pity. But this girl simply nodded and moved on with her morning. There was something unusual about that restraint. He sighed quietly and returned to his porridge. The rest of the morning carried on with ordinary rhythm. Shushin scrubbed the counters, fetched fresh vegetables from the basket near the door, and adjusted jars of dried spices on the shelf. Outside, children passed by carrying kites, laughing as the strings tangled in the wet breeze. An old man stopped at the stall to ask if she would be selling dumplings in the evening, and she promised with a smile. Zhou Jiaming stayed out of the way, finishing his meal with quiet dignity, then setting the bowl neatly beside the sink. He wasn't used to such humble spaces, but for some reason, he didn't feel out of place here. By afternoon, sunlight broke through the thinning clouds, spilling gold onto the street. Shushin took advantage of the lull, sitting by the counter with a needle and thread, patching a tear in her apron. She was aware of him still there, seated across from her, watching the world outside with that thoughtful, unreadable gaze. At last, she spoke without looking up. "It's getting late. Perhaps you should think about finding somewhere else to stay tonight. You wouldn't want to be robbed again." Her words were polite, but firm, her way of reminding him that her life wasn't built to house strangers indefinitely. There was a pause. Zhou Jiaming turned his head toward her, his expression calm but touched with something vulnerable. "If I could, I would," he admitted. "But I don't have money on me. No phone, no ATM card. Everything was taken. Right now." He hesitated, as if enused to confessing weakness. "I have nowhere to go." Shushin's hands stilled on the fabric. She looked up, studying his face carefully. He was too composed, too steady for a man who had supposedly lost everything overnight. Yet his words carried no trace of falsehood. "You're telling me you have nothing?" she asked slowly. "Nothing," he confirmed. The street outside was filled with laughter again as two schoolchildren ran past, their satchels bouncing on their backs. The contrast between their simple joy and the quiet gravity of his situation struck her strangely. For a moment, neither spoke. Shushin lowered her gaze to the apron in her hands, her mind wrestling between caution and the instinctive kindness that had made her save him the night before. Zhou Jiaming, meanwhile, sat in silence, waiting. His posture neither pleading nor arrogant, simply steady. And so, the afternoon air between them was thick with the unspoken question. What place could a stranger like him possibly hold in her small, ordinary life? By the time evening fell, the narrow town street had gone quiet. Only the faint chirping of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog echoed through the cool night air. The stall had been scrubbed clean, shutters drawn, and the last lantern snuffed out. Shushin gathered her things, secured the wooden lock, and climbed the narrow staircase to her small apartment above. She was tired, the kind of weariness that sank into her bones after a long day of serving. But as she reached the landing, she noticed Zhou Jiaming wasn't following her. Down below, he sat on the wooden bench outside the stall, arms resting on his knees, staring into the dark street. The chill of the night clung to his shirt, damp with mist, and mosquitoes circled lazily around the lamp post nearby. He didn't call out, didn't ask to come up. In his mind, he owed her too much already. Food, clothes, shelter. Kindness given without question, without demand. He knew better than most men that such uncalculated generosity was rare. So he stayed out there quietly, accepting the cold, as though it were only fair payment for the debt he had begun to carry. An hour passed, then another. The light upstairs flickered, casting faint warmth over the balcony. Finally, Shushin's voice rang out, half exasperated, half teasing. "Hey, stranger!" Zhou Jiaming looked up. "Unless you've got medicine money, you might as well stop sitting there like a fool. Either you'll catch a cold, or the mosquitoes will finish you first. Come up." For the first time that evening, the corner of his mouth tugged upward in the faintest of smiles. He rose, brushing the damp from his sleeves, and made his way upstairs. When he entered, the room was simple but warm. Shushin didn't look at him directly, just tossed him a clean towel and set of clothes she'd pulled from the storage chest. "Change into those," she said briskly, pointing toward the folding screen that gave a semblance of privacy. Then she gestured toward the small wooden table where steam curled from a bowl. "There's peppered noodles. Eat after you wash up." Her tone was casual, but the little gestures, fresh clothes, hot food, spoke louder than her words. As she moved toward her own small room at the end of the hall, she added without turning back, "We'll figure out what to do with you tomorrow. For now, just bathe, eat, and get some sleep." The door closed softly behind her. Alone in the space she had lent him, Zhou Jiaming stood still for a moment. The faint scent of jasmine soap lingered on the towel in his hand. He changed into the dry clothes, slightly loose but warm, and felt an unfamiliar sense of quiet settle over him. He ate slowly, savoring the bowl of noodles that had just the right hint of spice to chase away the night's chill. The heat spread through him, grounding him in this modest, borrowed corner of the world. When the bowl was empty, he set it neatly aside and turned to the small room. It was clearly hers. Everything in it spoke of a young woman's life. On the wall hung photographs. A little girl in pigtails holding a red certificate. A teenage Shushin grinning in a sports jersey, medal hanging from her neck. Family photos of her with her parents, smiling in front of mountains, at temple fairs, around the old wooden table that must have been theirs. He studied them quietly, something in his chest tightening. This girl. She was rooted here, loved, raised in the warmth of an ordinary family. For a man like him, whose world had been nothing but contracts, negotiations, betrayals and battles for power, these pictures felt almost foreign. And yet, strangely, he couldn't look away. He sat down on the edge of the bed, towel still draped over his shoulders. His eyes lingered on the smiling faces in those frames. The innocence, the simplicity, it stirred something he hadn't felt in years. A deep breath left him. He lay back slowly, the thin quilt covering him. Outside, the night crickets sang in rhythm, and somewhere across the street, a baby cried then quieted again. In the quiet of Shushin's small, ordinary room, Zhou Jiaming closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, the hidden heir, the betrayed businessman, the man everyone wanted something from, slept like he belonged. The morning broke with a soft haze of mist rolling off the hills. The street below was still hushed, only the occasional rattle of a bicycle wheel and the bark of a dog disturbing the calm. Shushan stirred awake to the faint sounds of clinking porcelain and the scrape of wooden stools being shifted. She blinked, frowning slightly. That wasn't the sound of her neighbors. It was coming from downstairs. Still in her cotton sleep shirt, she patted down the creaky staircase. There he was. Zhou Jiaming stood behind her stall's counter, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. He was wiping the tables with quick, efficient strokes, stacking stools neatly against the wall. Beside him, a pot of rice porridge was already bubbling on the stove. For a second, Shushan simply froze, surprised. He moved with a kind of practiced precision, not clumsy like someone unfamiliar with such chores. But it wasn't just the work, it was the way he carried himself. Upright, focused, almost too disciplined for a man who had supposedly stumbled into town with nothing. "You?" she started, clearing her throat. "You don't have to do that." Zhou Jiaming looked up, expression calm. "You've already done more than enough for me. It's only fair I help." Shushan crossed her arms. Cleaning tables isn't exactly the same as repaying a debt. A faint smile touched his lips. "Still, it's a start." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, he ladled some porridge into a bowl and set it before her. "Breakfast. You should eat before customers arrive." The aroma made her stomach grumble, betraying her. She sat reluctantly, spoon in hand. "You're not supposed to know how to cook porridge like this. Not unless you've done it before." "I've traveled enough places," he replied easily, sliding onto a stool across from her. "One learns to survive." The way he said it carried weight beyond the simple words. She frowned, but didn't press further. They ate quietly, the steam rising between them. Outside, the street began to wake. The butcher across the way calling out prices, the postman pedaling past with a stack of letters. When the first customer wandered in, Zhou Jiaming rose smoothly, stepping into place without being asked. He carried bowls, fetched chopsticks, and even exchanged polite words with the old regulars. The neighbors gave him curious glances, murmuring among themselves. "New helper?" one woman teased. Shushan flushed. "Just someone passing through." The woman chuckled knowingly and left with her porridge. By mid-morning, the rush had passed. Zhou Jiaming wiped his hands on the towel and sat at the far end of the stall. For the first time that day, his sharp eyes softened, watching her count change into a tin box with practiced fingers. "You run this whole place alone?" he asked. She nodded. "It was my parents before. I kept it after they passed." Her tone was even, but there was a quiet strength in the way she said it. Zhou Jiaming studied her for a moment. Longer. Then, with deliberate calm, he said, "You're stronger than most people I've met." The words were simple, but something in the way he said them made her glance up. His gaze held no mockery, only a strange respect. She looked away quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Flattery won't pay for porridge, you know?" He chuckled softly, leaning back against the wall. For a moment, the stall felt warmer than the sunlight streaming in. Yet, in the back of his mind, the weight of his real identity pressed in. He was no ordinary traveler. He wasn't meant to linger in small food stalls, wiping tables and serving porridge. But for reasons he couldn't yet name, he didn't want to leave. And Shushan, still thinking him nothing more than a stranded stranger, was unknowingly giving him something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The next day dawned brighter than before, the sun scattering gold across tiled rooftops and damp streets. The little town buzzed awake, livelier now that the rain had passed. At Shushan's stall, bowls of steaming porridge passed from hand to hand as workers hurried to their shifts and schoolchildren wolfed down breakfast before dashing away. Amid the rhythm of it all, Zhou Jiaming moved steadily at her side, filling bowls, handing out chopsticks, and cleaning up with silent efficiency. It was only the third morning he had been there, but already, his presence had begun to draw attention. Shushan," an elderly man with a cane said as he slurped his porridge, squinting at Zhou. Where did you pick up this helper? Don't recall seeing him round here before. Before she could answer, a younger man from the fruit stall next door leaned in with a grin. Looks a bit too polished to be from our parts, doesn't he? Bet he's some city guy hiding from his wife. Laughter rippled through the stall. Shushan's cheeks warmed. He's just passing through. A traveler. That's all. But the words seemed to only stir more curiosity. Later, as the morning rush ended, Auntie Lou, the town's unofficial gossip carrier, slid onto a stool, lowering her voice. Child, you be careful. Men who appear out of nowhere. Who knows what they bring with them? Bandits come dressed neat too, you know? I understand, Shushan replied politely, ladling porridge into Auntie Lou's bowl. She tried to keep her tone steady, but her heart stirred uneasily. Across the counter, Zhou Jiaming had heard everything. He didn't flinch, didn't argue, simply set down the tray he was carrying and continued cleaning. His calmness, almost dignified, only added to the quiet mystery about him. When the customers were gone and the stall quiet again, Shushan finally glanced at him. He was sitting at the end of the counter, long fingers resting on the rim of his bowl. Does it bother you? She asked. What? The way people talk. He met her gaze evenly. No, people will always talk. It's only noise, unless you choose to listen. His words carried a gravity beyond the situation, as though he'd lived through far worse than idle gossip. For reasons she couldn't explain, it unsettled her more than it comforted her. The afternoon passed with ordinary tasks, washing, drying, preparing vegetables for the evening. Yet the whisper of Auntie Lou's warning clung to Shushan's thoughts. She found herself stealing glances at him. The way he straightened the jars with meticulous care, the quiet strength in his movements, the rare flicker of a smile when a child toddled past the stall. Too polished, too composed, too different. And yet, when the lanterns were lit and she locked up for the night, he carried the stools inside without being asked, his presence as natural as though he had always belonged there. That was the strangest part. How quickly the stranger was slipping into her ordinary days. As she climbed the stairs ahead of him, she couldn't help but wonder, who really are you, Zhou Jiaming? And why do I feel both safer and more uncertain with you here? The evening air was unusually still, the cicadas humming their songs as the small town gradually settled into night. Shushan had closed the stall earlier than usual after selling out. For once, the air upstairs felt calm, even cozy, the faint smell of ginger and rice lingering in the room. Zhou Jiaming sat quietly by the window, elbows resting on his knees, while Shushan moved about the apartment, cleaning and tidying as she always did. The rhythm of her movements was practiced, wiping down the table, stacking bowls, folding a cloth here, brushing dust there. He tried to busy himself at first, offering to help with little tasks. But she had waved him off firmly. You've done enough, she'd said. Just sit. So he did, watching her, watching the way her hair slipped from its tie, the way her brows furrowed in concentration as she scrubbed a stubborn spot on the wooden table. He didn't realize how long he had been staring until she suddenly turned, rag still in hand, and caught him. Their eyes locked for an instant. His chest tightened, and he quickly looked away, heat creeping up the back of his neck. The rag hit the table with a soft thump. He blinked up to see her walking straight toward him, arms folding across her chest, her gaze sharp. Tell me the truth, she said firmly, standing over him. Who exactly are you running from? He froze. Was it your wife? She pressed. Her voice edged with a mixture of suspicion and frustration. Is that why you've been hanging around here? Don't tell me you picked my place because it was convenient. Why me? Her words stung sharper than he expected, not because of the suspicion, but because of the disbelief in her eyes. No, it's not like that, Zhou Jiaming said quickly, rising to his feet, his palms raised as though to show he had nothing to hide. I'm not married. I'm not running from anyone like that. Then what is it? He hesitated, struggling for words. Slowly, his hands lowered, and he exhaled deeply. I have a complicated life back in the city. complicated in ways I don't want to drag anyone else into. I needed space, a chance to breathe. That's why I ended up here. She tilted her head, unconvinced. Breathe? Who comes all the way to a rural town for that? If you wanted a break, why not just go on vacation to some beach or travel abroad? Why here? His lips parted, but no answer came. Only silence. Shushin shook her head, turning as if to walk away, but his voice followed her softly. I know it sounds strange. I know you don't have any reason to trust me. But I promise you, I mean no harm. Something in his tone made her pause. She turned back, finding his gaze steady, even pleading. For a long moment she studied him, the stranger who had stumbled into her stall on a rainy night, who had nothing and yet carried himself with a quiet dignity that didn't belong in their little town. Her arms loosened. You're right, she muttered, brushing the hair from her face. I don't have a reason to trust you. But for now, I'll take your word. He nodded, relief flickering across his features. Thank you, and I'm sorry for putting you in this situation. The rag still hung from her hand, damp and crumpled. She sighed, tossing it aside. We'll figure it out tomorrow. Tonight. Just don't make me regret letting you stay. For the first time since she'd met him, Zhou Jieming gave her a small, genuine smile. I won't. The quiet tension between them didn't dissolve, but it shifted. Less like a wall, more like a line neither dared to cross. As Shushin returned to her chores, Zhou Jieming sank back into his seat, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the window. Complicated, he'd said, but even that was far too simple for the truth he carried. The next morning, sunlight poured into the small apartment in streaks of gold. The town outside was already awake with chatter and movement. Carts rolling, roosters crowing, fishermen shouting as they hauled in their morning catch. Shushin, tying her hair into a loose ponytail, glanced at Zhou Jieming, who was folding the blanket he had used the night before. You said you came here to breathe, right? She asked, slinging a woven basket over her shoulder. He looked up, surprised. That's what I said. Then come along with me. I'm heading to the market. His brows lifted. Won't I just be in your way? She smirked faintly. Only if you complain too much. The fresh sea life market was a world of its own. Rows of stalls lined the pier, bursting with fish so fresh they still shimmered under the morning sun. Lobsters clacking their claws in wooden buckets, and squid displayed neatly on trays with ice. The air carried that distinct blend of salt, brine, and spices from nearby soup vendors. Zhou Jieming took it all in, eyes trailing from stall to stall. He wasn't used to this kind of bustle. His world was usually fast cars, glass towers, and business suits. Here, the rhythm of life felt different. Raw and unpretentious, Shushin walked ahead. With practiced ease, pointing out the fishermen she knew, haggling for clams, laughing when one old seller teased her for being too picky. Come on, she said after a while, tugging him toward the fish deck. This is the best part. A group of women were gathered by the water, ladling steaming bowls of freshly made seafood soup straight from a massive pot. The broth was rich with herbs, ginger, and the day's catch. Shushin bought 2 bowls, handing one to Zhou Jieming, and they carried them carefully to the nearby beach. They sat on a low stone ledge facing the waves. The sea breeze was cool, tugging strands of hair loose from Shushin's tie. He took his first sip, savoring the warmth. This is incredible, she smiled faintly. Told you, it's my favorite place. For a while they ate in silence, only the sound of waves crashing and gulls calling above them. Then, out of nowhere, her voice softened. I used to come here a lot with my parents when I was young, she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. It used to be our Saturday thing, walking through the market, eating soup together. He glanced at her, but said nothing, waiting. Her fingers tightened around the warm ceramic bowl. But when I was about 8, my mother had a terrible fight with my father. I never really knew the details, only that it got bad. A few weeks later, she left. She wanted to take me with her, but my father refused. She paused, breathing through the old ache. Not long after, he brought another woman into the house. He said I needed a mother figure to watch over me. He married her just like that. I was only 11. Her spoon stirred slowly in the broth, though she wasn't eating anymore. 3 years later, he passed away. And that's when life got worse. My stepmother pulled me out of school. She said books wouldn't feed me. Instead, she made me beg in the streets so we could survive. She took whatever I brought home. Zhou Jiaming's grip on his bowl tightened. His chest stirring with anger he tried to swallow down. Shushan's voice, though, didn't tremble, carried a quiet strength. I picked up cooking from the neighbor women, sometimes sneaking into my mum's old recipe books. That's how I started. Cooking became survival, but also, in a way, it became mine. Only then did her composure falter. Her eyes glistened, and she quickly wiped them with the back of her hand, sniffling. Then she forced a small smile, looking at him as if she'd suddenly remembered who she was talking to. Anyway, she said, voice lighter, don't go getting sad. I've been doing fine since then. It hasn't been easy, but my mum always told me, stay steadfast, never let go of God. And I haven't. For a moment, the only sound was the sea. Zhou Jiaming finally smiled faintly, though his eyes lingered on her longer than he meant to. And your stepmother? He asked softly. She let out a long breath. She still comes around, once or twice a year, takes some money, then disappears again. I don't know. She lives, and honestly, I don't care. The words carried no bitterness, just weariness. Zhou Jiaming stared at her, admiration and sorrow mixing within him. Here was a girl who had faced storms alone, yet still managed to stand. Still cooking, still smiling, still faithful. He lifted his bowl slightly, as if making a silent toast. To steadfastness, then. Her lips curved in a small, almost teasing smile. And to breathing. They clinked their bowls together gently, the warm soup filling their stomachs as the sea wind wrapped around them. For that moment, even with all the weight of their pasts, it felt like the world had given them a small pocket of peace. The lamps burned low in the little house, shadows swaying on the walls. Outside, the town had fallen quiet. No more clamor from the market, no more fishermen calling out prices. Only the sound of crickets filled the night, blending with the occasional creak of the wooden rocking chair where Shushan sat. Her slender hands moved gracefully, knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a scarf. The rhythm was steady, almost like a lullaby, her gaze half lost in the yarn and half in her thoughts. Zhou Jiaming leaned against the doorway at first, just watching. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put into words. The way she filled silence without noise, how her presence softened the air around her. Slowly, he walked closer, his steps quiet on the old floorboards. You're really good at that, he said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. She glanced up at him, smiling faintly. Knitting? He nodded, lowering himself onto the stool beside her. His eyes lingered on the neat loops forming with each flick of her hand. I'm sure your mother taught you. The smile on her lips deepened, but she shook her head gently. Not my mother. My grandma. Your grandma. His tone carried surprise, maybe curiosity. Yes, she said softly, her eyes glinting in the lamplight. She had this way of making everything feel steady, even when the world outside wasn't. She taught me how to cook, how to sew, how to knit, and how to pray when there was nothing else left to do. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Zhou Jiaming watched her fingers move, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He hadn't spoken much of his own past. Not here, not anywhere, really. But something about the way she sat there, unhurried and open, nudged him. Shushan seemed to sense it. She set her knitting needles down slowly and leaned back in her chair, rocking gently. Her eyes lifted to his. What's it like in the city? Really like, Zhou Jiaming's lips curved into a wide smile, almost instinctive. The city, it's a world of its own. When I was younger, it was exciting. My sisters and I, we used to run around the mansion after school, chasing each other through halls that never seemed to end. We'd go shopping together with my mother, or sometimes travel when my father was in a good mood. Felt like life was one long adventure. As he spoke, his eyes lit up, as if those memories pulled him somewhere warmer. But just as quickly, the light dimmed. His smile faltered, shadows creeping into his expression. That was until, he paused, swallowing hard, until I fell ill, needed a blood transfusion. My father. He gave a dry laugh, shaking his head. He wasn't a match. The words hung heavy, and Shushin waited quietly, her gaze fixed gently on him, inviting him to continue. After that, he went on slowly. It was like he changed overnight. He sent my sisters abroad, said they needed to focus on their studies to grow without distractions. I wasn't even allowed to attend my elder sister's wedding. He told me straight to my face, no half-bloods are allowed where full-bloods marry. He laughed again, but this time it was bitter, hollow. Imagine that. Half-blood. His own son. Shushin's lips parted slightly, her chest tightening. I haven't seen any of them since, he said, his voice quieter now. My sisters, my own blood. I don't even know what they look like anymore as adults. My father always said bad eggs corrupt good manners, so he kept me away. The room seemed to shrink, the walls listening, the night holding its breath. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. From then on, it's been one business deal after another. No breaks, no space to breathe. Even vacations, those aren't mine. They're company trips, the whole team together. Never just me. His jaw clenched as he continued, the bitterness raw now. Every time my mother tried to defend me, he shut her down. Told her the only reason she was still in his house was because of his daughters. Said the boy she brought into his home was nothing but a burden. A bad egg from God knows where. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight, the confession spilling like a wound reopening. And all of it sits on me. Pressure. Expectations. Chains that no one else can see but I feel every second. It's like carrying a mountain, and He stopped. His throat tightened. He couldn't finish. For a long moment, there was only silence again. The creak of the rocking chair filled the gap, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. Then Shushin leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on his leg. The touch wasn't heavy, just enough to ground him. Her voice was calm, carrying a kind of quiet faith that felt like a balm. Eventually, she said softly, we'll all be fine. I trust God. Her words weren't elaborate, but they held something far greater, conviction, the kind forged in hardship. And for the first time that night, Zhou Jiaming allowed himself to look at her. Really look. Her face was serene, her eyes steady, her touch warm. In that moment, it felt like she wasn't just speaking to him. She was lending him a piece of her strength. He let out a slow breath, one he hadn't realized he was holding, and nodded faintly. A small, almost broken smile tugged at his lips. Yeah, he murmured. Eventually, the night deepened around them, but in that little room, with shadows swaying on the walls and threads of stories woven between them, it felt like something fragile but real had just been shared. Something that might grow. The sun rose soft that morning, spilling gold across the rooftops and warming the little town awake. The scent of fresh bread and roasted beans drifted in the air, mingling with the faint chatter of neighbors already setting up their stalls. Inside her small apartment above the shop, Shushin knelt by the side of her bed, fingers clasped together, her voice low but steady. Lord, heal us both, she whispered. Everywhere we are broken, in places no one sees. Touch Zhou Jiaming's heart the way only you can, and touch mine too. Help us find light where we've only known shadows. When she rose, her spirit felt a little lighter. She tied her apron around her waist, ready for another day. Downstairs, the stall was already humming with early customers. Zhou Jiaming, hair still a little ruffled from sleep, helped her arrange jars before slipping her phone into his palm. Can I borrow this for a while? He asked quietly. She nodded, a little curious, but didn't press. He stepped outside, leaning against the post by the stall, his voice low as he spoke into the phone. The conversation stretched on, longer than most, and though Shushin kept her focus on steaming buns and wrapping parcels for waiting customers, her eyes flickered toward him once or twice. His face shifted as he spoke, sometimes serious, sometimes softened by a rare smile. Whoever was on the other end, it mattered to him. When the rush finally slowed, he slipped back inside, placing the phone gently on the counter. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair before looking at her. "My mom," he said quietly. "She wants me to come back. And my father too." Shushin paused, holding a cloth in her hand, watching him carefully. "He didn't say it outright," Zhou Jiaming went on, "but I could hear it. He misses me. Low-key. But it's there." His eyes softened, almost boyish for a moment. "I miss them too. I love my dad, Shushin, even though he doesn't share my blood. Even though—" He stopped, shaking his head lightly. "I understand his reaction. It was harsh, but I get it." Something in his tone was freer than before. Less bitterness, more longing. Shushin only gave him a small nod, her heart quietly glad. 2 days later, as the afternoon sun hung warm above the rooftops, a sleek black Audi pulled up in front of Shushin's little shop. Its polished exterior was stark against the rustic street, drawing curious glances from passers-by. She already knew it would come. He had told her earlier that he would be returning home. Still, her hands worked carefully as she packed a small container, steam rising from the hot squid soup she ladled inside. "Here," she said, pressing it into his hands as he prepared to leave. "For the road." He looked at the container, then back at her. His lips parted, as if to say something, but instead he moved forward suddenly, pulling her into a hug. Shushin froze, her breath catching. She hadn't expected it. She could only smile softly against his shoulder, then gently wave him off. But he didn't move right away. They stood still, the quiet between them heavier than words. Finally, she slipped from his grip, adjusting her apron like nothing had happened. With a light laugh, she tapped his shoulder. "See? Everything is working out better now." Her words carried no fear, only quiet assurance. Zhou Jiaming laughed too, shaking his head slightly, his eyes warm as he gazed at her one last time. Then he turned, slid into the car, and the black Audi rolled away down the street. From her window upstairs later that evening, Shushin looked down at her little stall, the jars neatly aligned, the space a little emptier without him leaning against the post. A smile curved her lips. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and walked back inside, the quiet somehow comforting. Something had changed. For him, for her, maybe for both. The mansion gates opened wide, the familiar crunch of gravel beneath the black Audi's wheels echoing through the courtyard. Zhou Jiaming stepped out, inhaling the scent of freshly cut grass and polished marble floors. It had been months, but everything looked untouched, as if waiting for him. Inside, the air was thick with silence, until his father appeared from the grand hallway, tall, stern as ever. Zhou Jiaming lowered his head, his voice firm but soft. "Dad, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have run off without telling anyone where I was going. It was childish. I just—" His throat tightened. Needed space. For a moment, he thought he'd only hear scolding or see that cold wall again. But instead, his father's expression shifted. Slowly, carefully. He stepped forward, his hand hovering, then rested firmly on Jiaming's shoulder. And then, without a word, his father pulled him into an embrace. Zhou Jiaming froze. He hadn't felt this warmth in years. His chest ached as the realization hit him. He had missed hugs from his dad more than anything. His father patted his back gently, awkwardly, as if remembering how. Hesitant, Jiaming raised his arms, wrapping them slowly around the man who had seemed unreachable for so long. Behind them, his mother stood by the staircase, her hands clasped tightly together, tears glistening in her eyes as a smile tugged at her lips. That night, after a long family dinner filled with hesitant laughter and cautious conversation, Zhou Jiaming retired to his room. He stretched out on his wide bed, phone in hand, and scrolled through his contacts until he found numbers that once felt distant. His sisters. The call lasted hours. They cried, laughed, teased, catching up on everything they had missed. One by one, they promised to see him again, to talk more tomorrow, to not let silence separate them anymore. By the time the call ended, the mansion was quiet. Jiaming lay on his back, staring at the ceiling with a faint smile. But when he closed his eyes, it wasn't his sisters' faces that came to mind. It was hers. Shushan, her gentle laugh, the way she adjusted her apron, the steady light in her eyes when she told him not to give up. Her face filled his thoughts until his lips curved unconsciously. His thumb hovered over his phone. He wanted to call, just to hear her voice, even if for a moment. But then he glanced at the time, too late. She was probably asleep. So he let the phone drop onto his bedside table, shut his eyes again, and fell asleep with that small smile still on his lips. The next day, life resumed. Meetings, business deals, numbers and documents. But this time, the air was different, lighter. The pressure wasn't crushing him anymore. His father wasn't breathing down his neck the way he used to. Slowly, the mansion began to feel like home again. The weeks stretched on. Each day carried him deeper into the rhythm of work, the comfort of family dinners, the new warmth that had been restored. And in that rhythm, without realizing it, Zhou Jiaming began to drift. The calls to Shushan grew fewer. The urge to reach for his phone at night dulled. Her laughter, once sharp in his memory, began to blur at the edges. Piece by piece, day by day, he was forgetting the girl at the little stall, forgetting the warmth of her prayers, forgetting the way she told him, everything will be fine. The world of marble halls and boardroom tables was swallowing him again, and Shushan was fading into the background of his memory. The days in the small rural town rolled on gently, like waves brushing the shore. Shushan rose early every morning, her prayers whispered in the dim light of dawn. She didn't pray for more customers, or for herself alone. Instead, she prayed for both of them, for Zhou Jiaming's healing, and for her own heart not to grow weary. Lord, she murmured one morning, her palms folded together as the kettle hissed in the background. I know you're doing something in our lives. Heal the parts that ache, the parts that we've hidden away. Give him strength to stand in the place you've called him. And for me, teach me to keep smiling. Her stall opened, the sun climbed, and the little town bustled in its simple rhythm. Sometimes when she locked up the store at dusk and climbed the stairs to her small apartment, she'd pause, her eyes drifting to the old wooden chair by the corner of her living room. It was the chair he always sat in. She could almost picture him there, long legs stretched, hands folded loosely, that hesitant smile tugging at his lips while he watched her bustle about. The memory made her smile faintly, not in longing or worry, but in quiet peace. He must be doing well now, she told herself once, setting her knitting basket on the table. Maybe even smiling again, the way he should. And with that, she felt content. Meanwhile, far away in the city, Zhou Jiaming's life had shifted. The heavy distance with his father had melted into something warmer. They shared more dinners now, and sometimes his father would even invite him into discussions he once kept private. He didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. His father's voice, once so sharp, carried softer tones. His mother, happier than she had been in years, often watched the two of them converse, her eyes glowing with unspoken relief. Jiaming buried himself in business deals and strategies, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel suffocated. The weeks rolled by, filled with meetings, laughter with colleagues, and the occasional late-night conversations with his sisters. And somewhere in the blur of his new life, Shushan slipped to the back of his mind. 2 months passed without a word, until one night, he was leaning back in the black leather seat of the car, his driver taking him home after another long day. The city lights streaked by the window in a blur of gold and white. He was exhausted, already loosening his tie when his phone lit up. A name he hadn't seen in weeks. Shushan. His chest tightened. His mind lit up so quickly, so fiercely, he nearly thought he was dreaming. He hadn't even realized how long it had been since they last spoke. With trembling fingers, he swiped the screen. Hello! His voice was cautious, almost breathless. The sound that answered him froze him in place. Her voice, gentle, familiar, like fresh air rushing through a room that had been locked too long. But there was something in her tone, a steadiness that shook him to the bone. Zhou Jieming, she said softly, almost as if she had been rehearsing it for weeks. I just wanted to know how you are. The driver glanced at him briefly in the rearview mirror, curious at the sudden stillness of his boss. But Jieming didn't notice. His heart pounded, his throat dry. For weeks he hadn't thought of her. And now, in a single moment, it was as if every memory, every glance, every prayer had come rushing back at once. He swallowed hard, eyes staring at the streaking lights outside. I'm fine, he managed. His voice cracked slightly, betraying him. Better, I think. But hearing your voice, he paused, lowering his head. I didn't realize how much I missed it. For a second, silence stretched on the line, heavy but warm. And in that quiet, Zhou Jieming felt something break open inside him. An ache he had buried deep, an ache that reminded him he was alive. Her voice cracked on the phone. At first, Zhou Jieming thought he had misheard her, until the soft, stifled sniffle reached his ears. His grip on the phone tightened. Shushan. His tone sharpened, his chest pulling tight. She tried to laugh it off, but it tumbled out broken, shaking. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called. I don't want to disturb you. Her words dissolved into trembling sobs. She's back, my stepmother. She came back tonight and... She said if I don't do what she asks, she'll throw me out. Her voice cut off with another flood of tears. In that moment, something in Zhou Jieming shattered. He didn't even let her finish. His entire being screamed at him to move. Where are you? His voice was sharp, commanding now. Outside at the stall, she whispered. Stay there. Don't move. He lowered the phone, heart hammering. Turn around, he snapped at his driver. Back to her place. Now. The car swerved, cutting through the glowing veins of the city. His pulse beat faster with every passing streetlight, his mind replaying the sound of her tears, the way her voice broke. Guilt clawed at him. Guilt so sharp it was almost physical. He had forgotten her. Forgotten the woman who gave him shelter when she herself was fragile. When they pulled up in front of the little stall, the sight crushed him. There she was, sitting on the cold floor, her back against the wall, her head bent low, resting on her knees. Her small frame trembled beneath the thin cardigan she wore. Before the car had even fully stopped, Zhou Jieming was out, running toward her. Shushan. She looked up, eyes red and wet, and when she saw him, she broke again. Tears spilled, her body shaking as he pulled her into his arms. Her skin was icy cold. She must have been out there for a long time. He held her tighter, his chin pressing into her hair, and in that moment, his chest burned with self-loathing. How could he have left her like this? Forgotten her story, her fears? She had housed him, prayed for him, even when it risked her own peace. And he had walked away. I'm here, he whispered against her temple, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I should never have left you like this. But she only sobbed harder, clutching his coat as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. He coaxed her gently toward the car, but when he tried to open the door, she resisted, shaking her head. No, I can't leave. This is my home. Everything I have is here. If she takes it from me, I'll have nothing. His heart clenched. Her voice, frayed, desperate, was the voice of someone whose world was collapsing piece by piece. He took her hands, steady and firm, and looked into her tear-streaked face. Shushan, listen to me. I won't let you lose everything. But right now, you have to trust me. Please. She hesitated, fear and shame warring in her eyes. But the intensity in his gaze, the sincerity, the quiet promise, stilled her trembling. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she let him guide her into the car. The drive to his house was silent, broken only by her soft sniffling. Her fingers twisted in her lap, her mind racing. She had never stepped into his world before, and the thought of it terrified her. When the car finally stopped at the gates of his family mansion, she froze. The grand house loomed ahead, glowing with light. Its polished windows and tall doors were everything she wasn't. Her breath caught. Her hands went cold again. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. Shouldn't be here. Your father, your family. They'll never accept me. Look at me, Zhou Jiaming." She glanced at her reflection in the car window, her hair messy, clothes wrinkled, eyes swollen from crying. "I look like nothing compared to this place. Compared to you." He turned to her, his expression firm but tender. "Stop," he said quietly. "Don't say that about yourself." She tried to resist again, her body heavy with fear, but he took her hand, warm, steady, unyielding, and held it tightly in his. "Shushan, you took me in when I was running from everything. You gave me a home when you had nothing to spare. Do you think I could ever care about how you look? Or what this house is?" Her lips trembled. Tears welled again. "Trust me," he repeated softly. "Just trust me." And before she could argue again, he stepped out, circled the car, and gently but firmly pulled her out with him. His grip on her hand never loosened. Her knees felt weak, her heart thundering as they walked up the steps together. Every part of her wanted to turn back, to run. But his hand was steady, anchoring her. And though she was terrified, something about the warmth of his hold whispered to her that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The house was quiet when they walked in, the sound of their shoes faint against the polished marble floor. Shushan's steps faltered, her eyes darting to every chandelier, every painting, every surface that gleamed too brightly compared to the dim little stall that was her world. Zhou Jiaming held her hand tighter, refusing to let go, sensing the storm in her. Without a word, he guided her to the guest wing that adjoined his own quarters. One of the domestic workers hurried forward, bowing slightly. "Prepare a room," Jiaming said quietly, his tone brooking no hesitation. Then, with a glance at Shushan, he added, "And bring her something neat to change into." The worker hesitated, lowering her eyes before murmuring, "Young master, we don't have any spare women's clothing in the house." Shushan's face flushed instantly, her head bowing in embarrassment, her fingers clenching tightly around the hem of her cardigan. Jiaming stood still for a moment, then his jaw softened. "Then give her one of mine." The worker blinked, surprised, but nodded quickly and hurried off. Shushan's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to say she didn't need it, but the words stuck. Instead, she stood silently, heart pounding, clutching the warmth of his hand. Like an anchor. Once she was led to the room and the worker placed a set of his fresh clothes folded neatly on the bed. Jiaming excused himself. "I'll be back," he said gently. "Rest." But she only managed a small nod, her eyes still downcast. He stepped out, crossing the courtyard into another part of the estate, the penthouse where his parents resided. The discussion took longer than he had expected. His father's face was unreadable, his mother's eyes heavy with concern. Jiaming explained everything, her stepmother, the threats, the night she gave him shelter. The words tumbled out, steady but full of weight, and though his father asked questions sharply, Jiaming didn't waver. "She has nowhere else," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "And I can't. I won't leave her to that kind of cruelty." His mother reached out, resting a hand on his arm, her eyes softer now. His father remained silent for a long time, as though measuring his son's conviction. By the time Jiaming left, the night was deep, and his body felt heavier. But the thought of her waiting alone tugged him forward. Meanwhile, in the guest room, Shushan stood under the shower. The water cascaded down her back, warm but merciless, washing away the dust and cold of the street. But it couldn't wash away the ache in her chest. Her sobs broke freely now, muffled by the sound of the water hitting the tiles. She pressed her palm against the wall, her forehead against her wrist, the weight of years of loneliness pressing down on her. Why did life have to be so cruel to her? She missed her mom even more now, but she didn't even know where her mom could be now. The weight of how tough life has been for her just broke her deeply. Then, there was a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Miss, are you all right?" The worker's voice floated in, gentle. Shushin squeezed her eyes shut, biting her lip to silence herself. She tried to answer, but only a choked sob slipped out. Shame burned through her. The worker lingered, then sighed quietly and walked away. Shushin leaned against the tiles, letting the water wash over her until her legs gave way. When she finally stepped out, hours seemed to have passed. She wrapped herself in the sheet and curled onto the floor, pulling a pillow over her head as if to block out the world. When Jeming returned, the worker intercepted him in the hallway. "She's still crying," she whispered softly. "She hasn't come out for a long time." His chest clenched. Without another word, he went straight to the guest room. The door was closed. He leaned against the wall beside it, sitting down quietly, his back pressed to the cold surface. The house was still around him, but he could hear the faint sound of her quiet sobs even through the thick door. So he stayed. Minutes bled into hours. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't push. He just sat there, waiting. Finally, when the silence stretched too long, he lifted his hand and knocked softly. "Shushin." His voice was low, careful. No reply. He opened the door just slightly, the warm light from the hallway spilling into the dark room. With a quiet flick, he turned on the lamp. The sight stopped him. She was lying on the floor, curled in on herself, the sheet wrapped clumsily around her frame. The pillow covered her head, as though she wanted to disappear into nothingness. Something inside him broke. He stepped in quietly, his footsteps soft on the floor. Kneeling beside her, he carefully lifted the pillow away. Her face was pale, damp from tears, her lashes clinging together. She stirred faintly but didn't resist as he slid an arm under her shoulders and another beneath her knees. Lifting her felt like lifting something far too fragile, as though she might shatter if he wasn't careful. He placed her gently on the bed, tucking the sheet tighter around her before pulling a soft duvet over her. He lingered, adjusting it carefully to her chin, his fingers brushing lightly against her hair. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her. The faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her face softened in sleep, even if it was troubled, something in him settled. Dimly, he lowered the light, letting the room rest in a soft glow. With a last glance at her, he stepped out, closing the door quietly behind him. And as he leaned against the closed door, his heart whispered what his lips could not. "You're safe now." The light of the morning slipped quietly through the curtains, brushing the room in a muted gold. Shushin had been awake for some time, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed. Her knees were drawn close, the oversized t-shirt hanging loosely on her frame. Every so often, she raised a corner of it to wipe her face, the faint sting of swollen eyes reminding her of the night before. When the knock came at the door, her chest tightened. She quickly scrubbed at her face with the sleeve, sniffed in hard, and forced herself to lift her head. The door opened just a little, and Zhou Jieming stepped in. His presence, calm yet steady, filled the space. In his hand, he carried a tray porridge, boiled eggs, and a small plate of fruit. Without a word, he set it down gently on the bedside table, as though not wanting to startle her. When his eyes met hers, he noticed instantly the red rims, the puffiness, the way her expression faltered as she tried to compose herself. She turned away, quickly brushing her face again. "I'm fine," she whispered, voice hoarse. Then, after a pause, she added softly, "Thank you for yesterday, for coming back for me. I'm sorry if I had discomforted you by suddenly calling." He stood still for a moment, his hands sliding into his pockets. Then, quietly, he walked toward her, his steps unhurried, his shadow falling over her where she sat. "Do you?" His voice was low, careful. "Want to tell me what happened?" Shushan froze. Her back was still to him, her fingers clutching the fabric of the t-shirt she wore. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then, she gave a small, bitter laugh, shaking her head as if mocking herself. "You wouldn't believe it," she murmured. "Try me," he said simply. She turned then, her face blotched from crying, her eyes glassy. Her lips trembled as she forced the words out. "My stepmother. She wants to sell me off." The words hit the air like shards of glass. Jieming's eyes darkened instantly, but he didn't move. Not yet. Shushan's voice broke as she continued. "She said some man, someone who does overseas business, was interested. And if I didn't agree, she'd have me marry her friend. He's—" She swallowed hard, disgust tightening her features. "Old enough to be her father, older than her." Her laugh came out sharp and trembling, more like a sob. "She kept coming to my stall, telling me I was worth nothing to her, that I'd better get used to it." Her breath shook, tears spilling again despite her trying to hold them back. "She said I was just taking up space." The room felt too small for Jieming then. His hands tightened into fists at his sides. His jaw clenched so hard it ached. He lowered his gaze briefly, trying to steady himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and steady, but threaded with fire. "She said that to you?" Shushan nodded, her face hidden behind her hands now. "Over and over," she whispered. Jieming exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing his fists to relax. He couldn't let his anger frighten her, not now. He stepped closer until he was standing just behind her. Gently, he crouched down so he wasn't towering above her, his voice softer when he spoke again. "Shushan, look at me." It took her a moment, but she finally lowered her hands, blinking up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "There's no world," Jieming said firmly, "where you are nothing. Do you understand me? Not to me. Not ever." Her lips trembled, eyes searching his face as though weighing whether she could believe him. He continued, steady, like an anchor in a storm. "She doesn't get to decide your worth. She doesn't get to use you like that. Not while I'm here." Shushan's breath hitched. "But what can you do?" Jieming's jaw flexed again, but his eyes softened. "More than she expects," he said quietly. Then, almost instinctively, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. His touch was gentle, lingering for a moment longer than he meant it to. Shushan's chest tightened, her heart aching at the weight of his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt, if only faintly, that she wasn't alone in this fight. The tray of breakfast sat silently on the table, forgotten for now. The air between them was thick with unspoken things, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to carry the silence alone. The sun had climbed higher, spilling light across the manicured lawns of the Zhou estate. Shushan stood at the window of the guest room, her fingers tightening on the hem of Jieming's t-shirt. The fabric hung on her frame like an oversized shield, smelling faintly of him, but it did little to calm the nerves tying knots in her stomach. She had barely touched the breakfast he brought earlier. It wasn't hunger that kept her away from it. It was the thought of the people who lived beyond these walls. His parents. The thought alone sent her heart racing. When the knock came at her door this time, she startled. "It's me." Jieming's voice floated in, calm and grounding. She pulled in a shaky breath. "Come in." He stepped inside, no tray in his hand now, just a steady expression that softened when his eyes landed on her. He noticed the untouched food instantly but didn't mention it. Instead, he studied her, sensing the tension in the air. "My parents. They'd like to see you." Her chest dropped. She clutched the hem of the shirt tighter, eyes darting to the floor. Jieming, I can't. What if your dad tells it me?" She swallowed, voice breaking. "I really don't want trouble between your dad and you because of my being here." He stepped closer, closing the space between them. His voice was low, firm but gentle. "Shushan, don't say that. My parents are open to understanding your story." When she didn't move, he extended his hand. "Come. I'd be by your side." Her lips trembled, her body torn between fear and trust. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. His grip closed around hers warmly, guiding her out of the room. The walk across the courtyard felt endless. The Zhou family's penthouse stood apart from Jieming's building. Glass, wood, and marble glinting in the daylight, silent and imposing. Every step Shushan took felt heavier, her heartbeat loud in her ears. When the housekeeper opened the double doors, Jieming led her inside. The air was cool, the polished floors gleaming. And there they were, Mr. and Mrs. Zhou. His father sat with a newspaper in hand, posture straight, sharp lines on his face softened only slightly by age. His mother, graceful in a light silk blouse, looked up from her tea as the two entered. Shushan immediately lowered her head, her free hand nervously gripping the hem of the shirt. Father, mother. Jieming's voice was steady, almost protective. This is Shushan. For a moment, silence. The weight of their gaze pressed against her. She bowed quickly, voice trembling. Good morning, sir, madam. Mrs. Zhou set her cup down gently. Her eyes, though sharp, carried warmth as they studied the fragile girl standing beside her son. So this is the young lady, she said softly. Mr. Zhou folded his newspaper, his gaze lingering on Shushan. There was no cruelty in it, only curiosity, and something thoughtful as though measuring the weight of the girl before him. Sit, he said simply, gesturing to the sofa. Shushan froze, unsure. If the invitation was genuine or just courtesy. It was Jieming who tugged gently at her hand, guiding her forward until she sat stiffly beside him. Mrs. Zhou leaned slightly forward, her voice careful. You must have been through a lot. Shushan blinked, throat tightening. She wanted to speak, but the words tangled. All she could manage was a shaky nod, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Mr. Zhou's deep voice broke the silence. You're safe here. Whatever trouble you faced outside, it won't follow you here. Shushan's eyes flickered up at that, tears threatening to spill again. She opened her mouth, trying to respond, but no sound came out. Jieming, sensing her struggle, slipped his hand over hers on the sofa. It was a simple gesture, but it steadied her. Mrs. Zhou noticed. Her lips curved slightly, not disapproving, not cold. A quiet acceptance. The moment stretched, soft and fragile. For the first time since she stepped into the house, Shushan let herself breathe just a little easier. For 2 days after her first meeting with the Zhou family, Shushan barely left her room. She wasn't forbidden from wandering the house. In fact, the workers were warm, sometimes offering to show her around or bring her into the garden. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Every time she thought of stepping into the hallways, she felt a suffocating wave of unease. This wasn't her world. The tall glass walls, the marble staircases, the quiet order of the estate. It felt too clean, too far away from the cramped apartment she once called home. So she stayed inside. When Jieming came by, he never pressed her. He'd leave food, or sometimes just peek his head in to check if she was awake. She'd force a smile, always telling him she was fine, even when her puffy eyes said otherwise. It was on the second noon that he came in again, the house silent now that his parents had left for their engagements. He found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the hem of the oversized shirt she still wore. You've been locked in here too long, he said softly, sliding his hands into his pockets as he leaned against the doorframe. She gave a faint smile. I just didn't want to cross boundaries. This isn't my home. Something in his chest tightened. He crossed the room and sat a short distance away from her. And if it was? She looked at him quickly, alarm flickering across her face. Don't joke like that, Jieming. Her voice shook a little. This place isn't for me. I meant no offense, but I think I should go home. He stilled. The words hung between them. You want to go back? Yes, she whispered, eyes falling. I don't want to be a burden. And this doesn't feel like much of me. Silence. His gaze was sharp but unreadable. Finally, his voice lowered. And if your stepmother comes again? What then, Shushan? Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She froze because he was right. She had no answer, no shield, no one to stand for her if that woman showed up again. The silence was her answer. Jiaming sighed, rubbing his temples. For once, he looked uncertain, as though weighing whether to let her go or keep her under his roof. But in the end, he respected her wish. That evening, he asked his driver to take her back. Before she left, he stood by the car door. "If anything happens," his tone firm, "don't hesitate. Call me." She nodded, clutching her small bag close. Her heart ached strangely, but she forced herself to turn away as the car pulled out of the courtyard. That night, he found himself restless. The house felt too quiet without her presence. Out of habit, he pulled out his phone, staring at her name on the screen. He pressed call before he could stop himself. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft, almost fragile. "Hello." He exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening just hearing her voice. "Did you get home safe?" "Yes, thank you." A pause. Neither spoke, but neither hung up either. "I'll be fine," she whispered at last. He didn't reply, only listened until she said goodnight. When the call ended, his phone stayed in his hand. He lingered on her name, thumb brushing over the screen, until sleep claimed him. A week later, the storm broke. It was late afternoon when the banging on her apartment door started. Shushan froze, panic clawing at her chest. She didn't need to open it to know who it was. Her stepmother's shrill voice pierced the air. "Open this door right now, you ungrateful brat." Her hands trembled as she turned the lock. The moment the door swung open, the woman barged inside, dragging in a man with her, older, well-dressed, the kind of businessman who carried arrogance like cologne. His greedy eyes swept over Shushan instantly, and her stomach churned. "Here she is," her stepmother sneered. "I told you she's young, perfect for you." Shushan stepped back, shaking her head. "No, please. You can't do this." Her stepmother's eyes narrowed. "Don't be stupid, girl. Do you think you can survive on your own? You're worth nothing to me if you won't be useful. He's offering marriage. That's more than you deserve." The man chuckled, signaling to the two boys behind him. "Take her. She'll learn." Panic flared. As the boys moved toward her, the words tumbled out before she could stop them. I already have someone." The room froze. "What nonsense are you spouting?" her stepmother snapped. Shushan's voice cracked, desperation dripping through. "I'm already seeing someone. And I'm pregnant for him." Her stepmother let out a cruel laugh. "Pregnant? You think anyone would believe that?" She snatched Shushan's phone from her trembling hands. "Then prove it. Call this imaginary man of yours." She thrust the phone back into her hand, her glare daring her to try. With tears stinging her eyes, Shushan scrolled to one name, Zhou Jiaming, and pressed dial with shaking fingers. He answered almost immediately. "Shushan." Her voice quivered. I told her. I told her I'm pregnant for you." The silence on the other end was deafening. Jiaming's hand stilled around his coffee cup, the words crashing into him. "You're what?" Before Shushan could explain, her stepmother ripped the phone from her grasp. "Listen here, whoever you are. This lying bitch is making up stories. Tell her yourself." Shushan cried out, reaching for the phone, but her stepmother shoved her back and slapped her hard across the face. The sound rang sharp in the room. Jiaming's voice, strained but steady, came through the speaker. "It's true." Everyone stopped. Her stepmother blinked, thrown off. "What did you say?" "I said it's true," Jiaming repeated, his voice like steel. "I am responsible. She belongs to me." Shushan's breath caught, tears spilling freely now as she turned, staring at the phone in disbelief. The man frowned, suspicious. "You're saying you want to marry her?" "Yes," Jiaming said, his tone unwavering now. "Immediately, if that's what it takes. But don't hurt her." Her stepmother's eyes narrowed, but greed flashed in them. "Then when? When will you send the marriage payment?" "Soon," Jiaming replied tightly. "I'll call you back. But don't touch her until then." There was a tense silence. Finally, her stepmother scoffed and handed the phone back to Shushin. "You're lucky, brat. Seems your lies caught someone stupid enough to play along." As she swept out with the man and his boys, Shushin sank to the floor, the phone pressed to her chest, her sobs breaking uncontrollably. Outside, muffled arguments rose between her stepmother and the man, their voices sharp with disagreement. But she didn't care anymore. All she could hear were his words replaying in her head. "I am responsible. She belongs to me." And somewhere across town, Zhou Jiaming sat frozen in his chair, staring at his phone. His heart pounded with the weight of what he had just declared. But was she really pregnant? The question echoed in his mind, but so did another thought. Darker, heavier. What had he just agreed to? The day was already heavy for Zhou Jiaming. His chest had been tight ever since that phone call with Shushin, the words she blurted out still ringing in his head like a bell that refused to stop echoing. "I'm pregnant for him." She had said it in desperation, yet when the phone slipped from her hand and her stepmother snatched it, he had claimed responsibility without thinking. It wasn't calculation. It wasn't some noble plan. It was instinct, an instinct that came from somewhere deep, a place he hadn't even explored within himself. And now, sitting across from his father in the vast study, he tried to lay it all down, her pain, her stepmother's cruelty, the threat hanging over her like a noose. "I'm going to call the police," he said, his voice firm but shaking slightly. "They can't just drag her around like that, treat her like property. This has gone too far." His father, stern but never unkind, leaned back in his chair and looked at him steadily. "The law doesn't protect a stepdaughter the same way it protects blood," he said quietly. "You might get them to let her go today, but tomorrow, they'll come back. And if the man has already paid, her stepmother will press harder. The law is thin here, Jiaming." Jiaming's hands balled into fists. He hated hearing that. He hated feeling powerless. Then his father's voice softened, carrying weight, wisdom, and something that startled him. "Son, do you like her?" The question struck him like a stone to the chest. He froze. His mouth opened but no words came. He wasn't ready to hear that question, much less answer it. Like? Was it just like? The face that had slipped into his mind countless times at night. The voice that had steadied him in his worst moments. The tears that shattered him when he saw her break. Was that just liking? He stammered, his throat tightening. He wasn't sure what to say. His father's gaze didn't waver. "Go," his father said finally, his voice low but commanding. "Go save what you cherish. Whatever name you want to call it. Friendship, love, duty, don't waste time debating it with me. Go." That was all it took. Jiaming didn't even think. He grabbed his coat, his car keys, and bolted out. His heart was racing faster than his feet as he stormed through the hall. He could hear his father calling after him faintly, but the words were drowned by the pounding in his chest. The streets blurred as his car tore through them. Every red light felt like a chain holding him back. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned pale. "Don't let me be late. Please, God, don't let me be late." By the time he pulled up outside her small apartment, the scene unfolding burned into his memory forever. 2 men were dragging her down the steps. Her frail frame shook as she struggled, her hands clawing at the railing, her voice hoarse from pleading. Her stepmother stood aside, arms folded, looking away as though the sight disgusted her. The older man loomed nearby, impatience and greed etched into his face. And then Shushin's eyes, red, swollen, exhausted. She had pleaded till her tears ran dry, until her voice cracked into silence. Her heart was already bending toward resignation. Her lips trembled as she whispered under her breath, unseen by all but heaven, "God, why have you forsaken your own?" And in that very breath, the screech of tires split the air. A black car pulled up sharply. The door flew open, and there he was, Zhou Jiaming. Not the stranger who had once stumbled into her shop, not just the man who had helped her before. In that moment he was something more. He dashed across the pavement like fire, ripping the men's arms away from her with a strength that startled even them. "Get your hands off her!" His voice thundered with fury, a voice that held no room for negotiation. For one suspended second, time froze. Shushan lifted her head weakly, her eyes blurring as she blinked. She had just whispered to God why he had forsaken her. And yet, here he was, Zhou Jieming. A light cut through her broken darkness. Her heart leapt and whispered back in silence. "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for not abandoning me." Her knees gave way. Her body slumped. The world spun. And before she could hit the ground, she fell into his arms. "Shushan! Shushan!" His voice cracked as he caught her, holding her trembling frame against his chest. Her skin was icy cold, her lips pale. He wrapped his arms around her like she was the most fragile thing in the world. His chest heaved, fury and despair battling inside him as he looked up at her stepmother and the older man. "If you ever touch her again," his voice was low, dangerous, "I swear I won't just stand by." The men hesitated, unsettled by the intensity in his eyes, but Shushan didn't hear any of it. She was already unconscious, her face pressed into the safety of his chest, her fingers weakly curled against his coat. He lifted her gently, bridal style, as though she weighed nothing, and carried her toward the car. Every step was heavy with purpose, his jaw clenched, his heart racing with guilt and anger. He hated himself for forgetting her, for letting her carry her battles alone, for only rushing here now. But as she rested in his arms, her faint breath warm against him, he knew one thing with unshakable certainty. He would never let her face this world alone again. The night had been long, too long, but by morning the matter was finally sealed. Zhou Jieming stood beside his father and their family lawyer as the transaction was closed. The older man who had come to claim Shushan left in silence after the refunded payment was handed to him, his face sour with humiliation. Her stepmother, on the other hand, received not just the refund but the full marriage payment in return. The lawyer signed off the receipts. The money was no longer an excuse, no longer a chain binding her. And for the first time in days, Jieming's chest felt lighter. He didn't know why he suddenly exhaled so deeply, as though a stone had been lifted from his ribs. Maybe because she was finally free. Free from the grip of a woman who saw her as a burden. Free from being sold like property. Free from tears that no one heard. She's free. He clenched his fists quietly, his eyes narrowing at her stepmother one last time. "If you ever dare touch her again, I won't stop at just paying you off. I will tear everything apart if it means keeping her safe." Meanwhile, back at the Zhou household, she lay quietly on the bed. Her frame was frail, her lips pale, her wrists still bearing faint marks where the men had dragged her. And 4 drip hung beside her, the slow drip of the clear fluid almost like the rhythm of a clock counting her back to strength. The family doctor had been called in. He worked with steady, practiced hands, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing, examining the bruises across her arm. "She'll be fine," he assured in a calm voice. Exhaustion and stress. She fainted from shock, but her heartbeat is steady. The bruises will fade. She just needs rest, food, and safety. Safety. That word clung to Jieming's chest as he pulled into the driveway and leapt out of his car the moment the brakes screeched. He didn't even shut the door before he was sprinting inside, his heart beating erratically. The door to her room creaked open. He stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. There she was, her body small against the wide bed, her hair fanned over the pillow, her hand resting limp on the sheets. The drip tube ran neatly along her wrist, but her face looked so still it tore him open. "Shushan!" His voice cracked softly. He moved slowly at first, then couldn't help himself. He crossed the room, dropped to his knees at her bedside, and reached for her hand. His palms engulfed hers as though trying to breathe life into them. He pressed his face into her skin, the warmth of her palm grounding him. He didn't care who was watching. His shoulders trembled, not from weakness but from the force of everything he had been holding back. "Thank you, Jesus," he whispered, over and over again. His forehead rested against her hand, his lips brushing against her knuckles, as if it was the only way to remind himself she was still here. Thank you for not letting me lose her. Thank you. Thank you. He couldn't explain it. Not to himself, not even to God. Just hours ago, fear had gnawed at him like a fire. Anger had consumed him. Desperation had drowned him. But now, here she was, alive, breathing, lying safe under his roof. And that was all that mattered. She wasn't just a friend. He knew it now, even if he hadn't found the courage to say it aloud. She was more. Something he couldn't yet put into words, but something that bound his heart in a way he couldn't escape. So he stayed there, at her side, burying his face in her palms, whispering gratitude like a prayer he didn't want to end. For the first time in a long time, Zhou Jiaming felt what it truly meant to cherish someone. The evening air was still when Shushan finally stirred. Her lashes fluttered weakly, and for the first time since she had collapsed, her eyes slowly opened. The room was unfamiliar at first. The wide bed, the clean sheets, the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. But then her gaze drifted sideways, and there he was. Zhou Jiaming sat slouched on the chair by her bedside, his head tilted forward, his hand still loosely holding hers as though even in sleep he refused to let go. Her lips parted slightly, a soft ache pressing in her chest. He stayed. When she shifted faintly, he stirred. His eyes opened, still groggy from exhaustion. But the moment he saw her awake, his body jerked upright. Shushan! His voice was hushed, heavy with relief. You're awake. She blinked slowly, her lips trembling as tears threatened again. But then her voice came, soft and low. I'm sorry. His brows furrowed. Sorry? For what? She bit her lip, her fingers tightening faintly against his. For lying. That day. I said I was pregnant just so they'd let me go. I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry for dragging you into it. For saying that in front of them. I only wanted to escape. For a moment, silence stretched between them. She thought he might scold her or worse, be disappointed. But then, out of nowhere, Zhou Jiaming broke into a sudden laugh. Not a small chuckle, but a laugh that burst out of him uncontrollably. He leaned back in his chair, covering his face with one hand, shaking his head as though the memory itself was absurd. You have no idea, he said between breaths. How confused I got in that moment. My brain just froze. I was about to tell them something else entirely, and then another laugh escaped his lips. I ended up saying yes. His laughter filled the room, light and unrestrained. And for the first time in so long, Shushan felt something break off her chest. Something heavy, something suffocating. The sound of his laugh was like an open door, letting freedom rush in. Her lips trembled, and before she could think twice, she leaned forward and hugged him. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her face buried against him as her voice broke softly. Thank you. Thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for everything. And thank you, Jesus. I'm no longer in her grip. The words were muffled, wet with tears, but her sincerity struck deep. Zhou Jiaming's laughter slowly faded. His arms, strong and sure, circled her back. He held her close, breathing her in. His lips pressed gently against her hair. The warmth of her body against his told him more than words ever could. They stayed like that for a long while, just two broken souls finding comfort in each other's presence. The following days passed gently, quietly. Shushan wasn't loud by nature, but neither was she silent anymore. The house felt warmer with her in it. She was soft-spoken, thoughtful, yet her presence lingered in every corner. A folded blanket here, the faint scent of soap after her showers, her humming when she thought no one was listening. And Jiaming noticed it all. Every morning before leaving for work, he would find himself standing outside her room. He never meant to linger, but his hand would turn the knob almost unconsciously. The door creaked open just enough for him to peek inside. There she was, still curled beneath the sheets, her face soft in sleep, her hair scattered over the pillow. He would stand there for a moment, watching silently, as though making sure she was truly there, safe and breathing under his roof. Only then would he close the door gently and leave for the day. It was a small thing, something no one else knew, but it was everything. Because in those quiet pauses, Zhou Jieming admitted the truth to himself. His heart wanted her, and he could no longer deny it. If you stayed up till now, we're glad and pray you wouldn't just smile as the story ended. We pray God fills your heart with His Holy Spirit to help you heal from whatever is weighing you down in Jesus' name. God bless you for watching. See you again.